Now, this is built upon our conversation that we had on Sunday, in which we spoke about how others show up repeating, saying the same things that we imagine them to say. I've been noticing this increasing more so in my life, as well as I've been noticing many have been communicating to me about their own experiences of this same phenomena. People are saying the same things that we're imagining about them. And so then each individual starts to consciously imagine how they want people to truly be, which is really a representative of how they see themselves to be. And it plays out in the experiences, in the conversations, in the relationships, personal life, business life, etc. And so thus today in this video, I want to further encourage this because we all have goals, we all have visions, we all have definite chief aims, and we all want harmonious relationships in these areas to be in mutual contribution, benefit to others, benefit to ourselves, and a relationship that plays out. Now, William Walker Atkinson has an interesting quote as I was reflecting upon this for further insights today. This quote right here stood out. He says, "To one who has the sense of oneness, the world broadens out immeasurably. In fact, to such a one, the universe is the world, and all that it contains seems akin to himself. He feels so close to everything and everyone. All are parts of the one." So this is another way of saying the same thing that we talked about in Sunday's video. I'll put a link in the description to it. And this is what we want to suggest to ourselves. So I brought this up before. Let's get into discussion. In one of his books, he brings up 5 classes of suggestion to further encourage certain thinking patterns of what we would see in relationships with others, which would represent how we truly want to be and how we want truly others to be, which is actually how we see ourselves, and others play out the theater of how we see ourselves. So we have goals, we have visions, and these could be personal goals, relationship goals, etc. And what we want to do is we want to observe, what are we suggesting to ourselves in regards to others? You could say unconsciously what we say I am too, which plays out in our relationships. And as we develop a heightened degree of awareness, we have awareness and awareness of, we're aware of what a person says, and we're able to track back to the thoughts within ourselves in relation to. We can also understand where we got these thinking patterns from, and we can also develop a higher degree of relationship between the conscious and the subconscious, and consciously choose in conversation or as we consume information what we want to believe. Because as I had mentioned many times, you are the only interpreter, and anyone can suggest anything to you. You could read any information, but at the end of the day, we are actually suggesting to ourselves in relation to what people share. So first we have suggestion of authority. He says, suggestion of authority manifests both in the positive authoritative statements directed to the point, and also by the spoken or written statements made by those who speak or write with an air of authority. So again, this is our own perception in relation to what we consider to be authoritative. So we know this in communication when it comes to direct response marketing, consultative selling, and copywriting. Those that understand these areas as far as communication goes in business recognize the importance and value of speaking from a perspective or a state, we could say, of authority. And so we can end up accepting certain suggestions in relation to. However, what we also want to recognize is some of that information, and maybe for some of us, a lot of that information might not actually be true and resonant with how we really are. And on this journey of realizing our goals, our visions, our definite chief aims, we are actually also becoming how we truly are, and we're developing a heightened degree of discernment to be able to look at any information that is being presented to us in any shape or form. Could be in videos, could be in books, could be anywhere, entertainment. And recognize that whatever is being presented, we have the ability to accept or reject whatever interpretation in relation to. Thus, we rekindle ourselves to the true authority within, which is ourselves. Number 2, the suggestion of association. And I want to discuss how this ties into our building relationships, because at the end of the day, the suggestion of authority, we could look around and see what other people are doing and the kind of relationships they have in personal life and business life, and form conclusions within ourselves, a lot of times without actively knowing this until we understand to a higher degree how this information works, and associate with that suggestion or information and form conclusions that our relationship should be this way or that way, when in actuality, the relationship, the ideal relationship, be it personal life, business life, is how you genuinely love it to be. And so, suggestion of association. He says, it is very easy for us to associate certain things with certain other things, as we will find that when one of the things is recalled, it will bring with it its associated impressions. So let's say a person received a suggestion in which they interpreted from the perspective of, if a person does not accept me when I do a business deal with them, or if I seek to have a relationship with the person in a personal regard, that means I'm not good enough. We would want to reflect and say, where did we get these thinking patterns from? A lot of times it's certain experiences a person had in the earlier stages of their life in which they formed conclusions. And although the authoritative figure might not have said certain things maliciously to imply, the individual had self-suggested in relation to the experience. As we've been discovering and discussing, what is the meaning of rejection other than the meaning we give to it? And so the meaning that I give to rejection is optimization data. It does not imply that I am not good enough, that I can't have what I want, or people do not want to hear what I have to say, because those kinds of interpretations, which may have been assumed to be how it works in my past, I recognize they were playing out the theater in how I would relate to others. They would reveal that programming in how I would relate to them, how they would relate to me, what they would say, and how the conversation would play out. And upon changing those thinking patterns to, I genuinely realize that people want to hear what I have to say. They want to receive this information, or whatever it is that I'm discussing, and it's beneficial to them. I hear many people play out, oh, what you say when we have our conversations is very beneficial to me. Now, I also took it a step further and I said, people show up ready to reveal to me what I can do more of, and people show up ready to ask me what I have done to overcome certain challenges or difficulties in my life, so it can be beneficial for them. Now, those are the kind of conversations I have more often. This is the same when it comes to personal life, for example. I believe that there are more people that are like me than I could possibly ever meet. So everywhere I go, I meet people that have the same interests. And as my interests change and they get more refined or nuanced, we could say, and the assumption might be that there are few people that will be interested in that very nuanced interest, I still notice that there are more people that share those nuanced interests that I could possibly ever meet. That was a suggestion that I had learned from somebody that was in a position of what I thought was authoritative. So we see then the power of unconsciously assigning the power of authority and to be more conscious as to what we and where we assign the association of authority. Because when we assign that meaning of authority to the external, what I would also assign, which was not the case with me before and many that I've spoken with, is that even if a person is perceived as authoritative, I could still pick up all the nuances of their communication, and I can accept whatever it is and I could reject whatever it is without confrontation. I'm within my own mind discerning between all the information that is provided. This allows us to really understand another person's paradigm and how they see reality, and we find ourselves not being afraid to have conversations with people because we're not afraid that they're going to say something that is going to influence us. Because at the end of the day, we are the only suggester, and we're forming healthy relationships here in relation to suggestion of authority. Now let's look at suggestion of association. He says, it is very easy for us to associate certain things with certain other things. So if a person had experience in personal relationships in which they got deeply involved, let's say romantically with someone, and they experience heartbreak, they might form certain conclusions that will prevent themselves from getting involved in another relationship because they will believe that this kind of experience that they had in that first relationship will play out again and again and again. So they're forming associations to personal relationships based on what they suggested to themselves in relation to a past experience. And we want to ask ourselves, is this really how we want to live? Is this really true? By simply asking ourselves these questions, what we notice is we reveal within ourselves accurate thinking, true and aligned thinking, such as, for example, every relationship gets better. I understand how reality works. I understand myself to a higher degree. I know what I want to a higher degree, and I know what I'm interested in to a higher degree, and therefore, those that will show up in future dating or relationships, etc., will share those same interests. Because as we mentioned in Sunday's video, people show up to play the theater of what we are thinking, both consciously and unconsciously, that which we are consciously and unconsciously saying, I am too. Although you consciously say, I am too, something for an extended period of time, either through the suggestion of authority, suggestion of association, it becomes our subconscious mind programming, and we begin to automatically experience those relationships. The suggestion of habit. He says, the suggestion of habit, this form of suggestion, is closely allied to the preceding phase, suggestion of association. In fact, some consider it to be merely a branch of the latter. But we feel that there is a decided difference in the operation of the two phases, and accordingly prefer to treat this one as forming a separate and distinct phase. Of course, all habit is an association with something in the past, but suggestion of habit may arise from an original cause of suggestion of authority, suggestion of association, suggestion of repetition, suggestion of imitation, or else from an original decision of the intellect resulting from correct reasoning. The former act or thought acts as a suggestive outside influence, although it belongs to one's own mentality. So we can look at this as habitual thinking. Now, the thing about habitual thinking in relation to relationships, when it comes to personal relationships and business relationships, is if we see the same patterns playing out in which we say, okay, I don't like those patterns, and we go through those same experiences again and again and again and again, a person might form a conclusion that that's just the way it works. And when they form that conclusion that that's just the way it works, they could end up seeing their friends and family and people around them actually verifying their thinking pattern. And as far as they look, they will find all this different evidence to support their way of thinking. This is true for the positive or negative. For example, if a person believes in business relationships, that there's no such thing as a fair deal, you have to take advantage of another person, then that's how it plays out. And they'll find a lot of different evidence, the evidence of the senses as we discussed, to prove it in equation. However, I've noticed in myself as I've changed those thinking patterns, the relationships that I have in business are always from the perspective of fair win-win deal. As a matter of fact, if it's not a fair deal and feeling is the secret, I can feel it. Intuition. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. I genuinely don't have a desire to do it. And actually what I notice is I don't even put that distinction. Do I want to do this or do I not want to do this? I want to do what I feel resonant with. I notice that happening more so as it plays out the theater of my thinking pattern. So if a person has inharmonious relationships with others in regards to business, and they had those experiences play out again and again and again and again, they might form the conclusion that this is just the way it works. And actually, what they will notice as we relate to the suggestion of association is when they think about business deals or doing business deals, this might create anxiety or emotional reactivity in regards to fear. And perhaps, actually, if they track back, that might have come from a suggestion of, now we can say, perceived authority, in which a person might have said that to them. There's no such thing as a fair win-win deal. And for whatever the reason, they allowed themselves to believe that. And so when they accepted the suggestion, they would start to see the evidence of that suggestion being accepted, play out as the theater in the different areas of life. And so as a result, the original cause, suggestion of authority, then becomes habitual. So now we have suggestion of repetition. So again, as we go through these, what we want to recognize, the most important aspect of this is that there is only one suggester. Only you within yourself can suggest anything. Even if I suggest something to you, even if through the suggestion of association or habit, maybe past associations or habits have been formed, you now have a heightened degree of awareness, a higher awareness. And I know this is the case because, again, I've been having many conversations with people where we're discussing suggestion of authority, association, habit, repetition, and imitation, which we'll talk about in a moment. And they all appear to have a heightened degree of awareness to discern. Notice this in yourself. You have a heightened degree of awareness to discern what is true, what is resonant with how you really are in relation to your goals, visions, and in this regard of this conversation, how you truly want your relationships to be. Because the reality is that you can have the relationships be exactly how you want them to be. This has been my experience, and this has been the experience of these individuals I've been having conversations with. Although at a previous stage in their life, such was the case with me, I didn't believe this to be the case. So suggestion of repetition, he says, the suggestion of repetition, this form of suggestion, may seem to be very much akin to the preceding phase, suggestion of habit. But there is a marked distinction and difference. Suggestion of habit has its power imparted to it by the habitual repetition of the act or thought on the part of the individual, while suggestion of repetition gains its power by the repetition of a suggestion from some outside object or person. It is the constant dripping of water wearing away the stone, a suggestion which passes you without much attention or consideration, although now we're becoming even more aware, and thus is the aim of today's video, is to bring forth a higher degree of awareness. And so he says, a suggestion which passes you without much attention or consideration. What you'll notice more so is that it won't pass your attention without consideration. You'll say, wait a second, do I want it to be that way in my reality? How do I want it to be? And then you'll find the suggestion. You'll say, well, the way I see it is fair win-win deal. And that's the kind of relationships that I have in business. Actually, that's the kind of relationship that I have in personal life. And maybe I don't even know how to articulate what that means. Like Steve Jobs had said in his commencement speech, and I'm paraphrasing, like in all matters of the heart, when you see it or when you experience it, you'll know. That's the one. So one does not need to be able to describe exactly what it is that they're looking for. They'll intuitively feel it when it's there, when they accept the suggestion that it is possible to have the kind of relationships that they want. He says, a suggestion which passes you without much attention or consideration, when first made, will gain both attention and consideration from you if it be repeated sufficiently often and in the right manner, which is why I always suggest saturating your mind with the same information and the same information from different perspectives, repetition of the same information from different perspectives. This is why I read As a Man Thinketh over and over again. And I brought this up many times, the 5 classes of suggestion. I tend to read this section here from William Walker Atkinson over and over again because I know that when I take this information and I apply this information, I live by it, I can actually reflect back on my reference experience and go back to this information, and this information makes even more sense. As it is stated in one of the translations of the Emerald Tablets, if the light exists within you, then the light in this tablets will respond. Then we actually see more of that which we say I am too, which is another form of suggestion of repetition. We actually see it more so. And we're doing this with information and thinking processes of how we truly want to be. Let's look at this for a moment. A person is born into this world, and they're experiencing, via the senses, information, and they're forming conclusions within. And there are suggestions on how to interpret this information from authority, through habit, association, repetition, etc. And they're forming conclusions about themselves and how they relate to others. And this is what's forming their relationships, personal life, business life, etc. Now, there comes a point in the journey where a person starts to think for themselves. They say, I've been living this way for a while, and I don't seem to be happy living this way. My relationships have so much disharmony. My job is overwhelming because my relationships with my coworkers. My business is frustrating because I have to deal with clients I don't want to deal with, and so forth. And they have all this optimization data based on their emotional reactivity, their physical expressions, their thought processes. And they say, I wonder if there's a different way of doing things. And maybe they come across some information like this, in which someone suggests, based on their reference experience, that they're living life a little differently, or maybe even radically differently. And then they say to themselves, what this person is saying is making some sense. I mean, I don't see it in my whole life the way it is right now being this way, but I guess it could be this way. Certainly, if it's this person's experiences, why can't I experience similarly this individual's experiences? And they will start to listen to those suggestions, and they accept the suggestions, and then they start to see the changes. They start to notice that their relationships are changing. Maybe they have new relationships, their business life, everything begins to change. And through the habit and new associations through those experiences and repetition of it, their entire reality begins to change. And to what degree? And what I do now is I personally don't look to the 5 sensory experience to say, how should I think? How should I relate? I look within myself and I say, how do I want to think? What is actually true? What do I actually love? How do I actually want to experience it? And I suggest it to myself. Repetition of the same information. Repetition of the same information from different perspectives. This is otherwise referred to as the subconscious mind work. And what I've always worked with since I read Think and Grow Rich is autosuggestion, self-talk, and we've been discussing revision, and also encouraging environments that are actually a form of repetition of the same information that I place myself in, such as mastermind groups, conversations with certain friends in which we talk about realities that we actually want to further experience or new realities that we want to be in. And something interesting happens during those conversations because we both genuinely want to step into another reality where people are experienced or relationships are experienced a certain way, in which we both have these distinct ideas. As mentioned in Sunday's video, people show up to reveal the thinking patterns within ourselves, and now these distinct, and we could say new thinking patterns, are further encouraged with each other. And through the conversation, it seems that we've gone into a different world. I notice this. After the conversation, I go around in my environment and people are behaving and talking and thinking the same things that my friend and I were discussing in our conversation. That's a form of suggestion of repetition. So now we get into suggestion of imitation, where he says, the suggestion of imitation, this form of suggestion, while being in itself a distinct phase of suggestion, nevertheless has a very close relationship with the several other forms of suggestion. In the acceptance of suggestion of authority, there is to be found an unconscious imitation of the mental attitude of the person asserting the authority. In suggestion of association, there is an imitation of the associated thing. And in suggestion of repetition, there is to be found evidences of imitation. Examples are found in schools of philosophy, theory, thought, and religion. So when we find ourselves around individuals that have a certain thinking pattern, a certain philosophy, a certain way of looking at reality, and they seem to be so self-persuaded that that's how reality works, but when we go into conversation with them, this is exactly how we want to experience reality as well, which I believe is spawned from our own desire. Because what I notice, as I mentioned, people show up to play the thinking patterns within ourselves. So it sparked in our own consciousness and externalized itself as another individual who maybe says the same thing in many different ways. And we involve ourselves in conversation with this person. And because now we are allowing our intuition to guide us, we're engaging in conversations where we truly feel that we are understood to the degree of further encouraging these thinking patterns. And what we notice is that we start to behave that way. We start to think that way more often. Our entire existence changes because of the suggestion of imitation. So we could say then we are imitating this person, but I would like to take this a step further. Because all change happens in consciousness, we are actually encouraging the thinking patterns in relation to ourselves now at this level of awareness. Whereas maybe back in the days, there was unconscious programming within ourselves in which we would find ourselves in certain environments. We would imitate certain authorities and we wouldn't like how it plays out. It was certain thinking patterns perhaps from our past that was unconscious, that what we were unconsciously saying I am to, that has played out as the theater, but now we're consciously aware of it. So the single cause. And so he says here, this I am I, in fact, is a focalized center of expression of that all power from which all power proceeds, and in which we live and move and have our being, an expression of that which in this instruction is known as power. So in summary, let's go back here. To one who has the sense of oneness, recognizing that the cause is within, and if we change our thinking patterns within ourselves, and we suggest it to ourselves, repetition of the same information from different perspectives, such as the example shared in this video, what we will notice is others showing up in our relationships, saying the same thing, playing out the same theaters as it has always been, except now we're consciously selecting how we want to have our experience. And we're doing it from a place of harmony. We're saying we want to have these experiences with others, and others are showing up to have these experiences with us, and they genuinely want to be there. Spirit of harmony. Win-win deals. Because of what he says here. To one who has the sense of oneness, the world broadens out immeasurably. In fact, to such a one, the universe is the world, and all that it contains seems akin to himself. He feels close to everything and everyone. All are parts of the one. So what we're really doing here with this information is throughout the day, and I recommend having a journal or taking some notes. And as you have interactions and conversations with people, and let's say you would have experiences with people that would be unpleasant, we say, what thinking patterns within ourselves seems to play out as this theater? Maybe you could work with somebody to discover a mastermind and so forth. Or you could ask this question within yourself, like I like to do. And you'll find the thinking pattern. And then you'll say, okay, well, I must have learned this somewhere. I'm sure you'll be able to track back to see where you learned it if you wanted to. Or you could say, how do I really want this to be? Knowing that people play out the theater within me as far as conversations, behaviors, interaction in relation to my personal or business goals? If there are infinite different ways of relating to people in reality, how do I really want to relate to people? And then we find those thinking patterns, and we encourage those thinking patterns. We work with the subconscious mind work, self-talk, or autosuggestion, and we align our thinking patterns to how we truly are. Because here's the beauty behind this. We're becoming who we really are, because at this stage of the journey, I notice this with myself and others, people know more so how they really want to be. And they want to represent how they really want to be, and they know what is true. So then we rekindle the heightened degree of trust with ourselves, and we listen to ourselves. And we continue the suggestions to ourselves as it plays out as the relationships with others from those regards. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an autosuggestion to further encourage. We can say, I recognize the true source and authority within myself, and as a result, I'm able to identify associations to the different relationships in my life, find the true and accurate thinking in relation to those associations, personal and business life, and further encourage those thinking patterns in autosuggestions, self-talk, and observing as those true, loving thinking patterns within myself play out as conversations, relationships, business dealings, personal dealings with others. Upon reflection, realizing the five sensory experience is an expression of mind, and the five sensory expressions are affirmation in mind. This further encourages the habit through the experiences and thinking this way to further reveal the ideal relationships that I desire. As the way of thinking becomes a predominant way of thinking, I notice that the repetition or suggestions from others is the same thinking patterns in relation to what I'm suggesting to myself. Thus, I recognize that others imagine me as I imagine them, which forms a harmonious imitation, realizing the one mind that reflects love externally from within. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.